My name is Michael Belcher. I'm a cinematographer, and Tokyo Story is a movie largely about family and the intergenerational relationships that exist there. It's a film that I feel invites me to reflect on my own intergenerational relationships, especially within my birth family, and the ways that they have changed and continue to change as I get older and I cross the different life thresholds and milestones. Going to college, starting a career, getting married, having a baby. All these things changed my birth family relationships. And becoming a parent, especially, has totally redefined my understanding of my parents and really all the older and younger generations around me. It's produced a lot of compassion and gratitude in me, probably first and foremost, but it's also called me to ask for accountability from my elders and my previous caregivers. And rewatching Tokyo Story now as a parent is a very sweet thing. I can now relate and feel more deeply into the experience of the older parents. And when I watch the wholesome kindness that we see from the character of Noriko, I'm even more soothed and settled by her. Tokyo Story is a special movie, I would say. It's a movie that, as I'm describing it, I think it can grow with you in these ways. And I think that's a useful way to think about art and a useful marker in distinguishing good art from great art. Does it age with you? Tokyo Story was released in 1953. It was made by Yasujiro Ozu, and it was chosen for today's conversation by writer-director James Gallagher. I know James first and foremost as a director and a writer, though he's worked extensively as a cinematographer and a photographer as well. As a director, James has directed commercials, music videos, plays, short films, and web series, including the short film New Partner, which won a Vimeo staff pick and won Best Comedy at the New York Television Festival. James also wrote and directed the short film Love, which premiered as a Vimeo staff pick and short of the week. James also recently completed Paulette, a short documentary that premiered in competition at the Big Sky Documentary Festival and was selected by Short of the Week and as a Vimeo staff pick. Finally, James is currently in prep on his first narrative feature as a writer-director called Pigeon. James and I have worked together on a few things, including his short film Love. I consider him a good friend and a very excellent filmmaker. Please enjoy. James, thanks for being here, bud.
Thanks for having me, man. It's really nice. Michael is one of those people who I talk to often, and every time I come away a little bit better, hopefully, than I went into it.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's true. I was very scared the first time we met, as a matter of fact. I was when we first started talking, I was intimidated. I was like, this is a person who is forcing me to think more deeply about things than I usually have to. And I was really careful about everything I said in your company. And I'm now less careful, but still think as deeply.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember we talked on the phone about kind of a low budget job for Vice. And I wasn't sure if I was going to take it, but I wanted to talk with you on the phone.
Yeah.
And you know how it is. A few minutes in, I'm just like, well, whatever it is, I'm taking it. Just to get some time together. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to feel the magnets pulling.
Yeah.
When I first talked to you about the podcast, it was Jeanne Dielman that came to mind immediately, the Chantal Akerman film. But then you took some time and you ended up coming back to Tokyo Story. And I'm interested in this experience because, choosing a film to talk about in this way, it tells us something, right? And I'm curious for you, what you feel like it tells you about yourself. I don't think it's obviously a value judgment in any way to switch from one to another.
Yeah.
But I think that talk about that decision, what you think it might point to.
That's a really good question. Jean Dielman, I love, obviously. And it came to me immediately. And And the reason part of the thing I admire about it is actually a lot of what I admire about Tokyo Story is its kind of insistence on watching the mundane to the point of saying mundane action is meaningful. And that is true in both Jean Dielman and Tokyo Story. But why I ultimately switched to Tokyo Story was because I then asked myself the question, which was, I went kind of deep with it, which was, well, really think about the films that have had a big impact on your life as a person. Because I think talking about filmmaking in a way can be boring in the sense that, like, I don't think of filmmaking as the end. I think of it as a means of expression. I think filmmaking is useful because of what it does to us. And so I wanted to think about, because I knew I'd have to think about it, a film that had really changed me and understand why. Tokyo Story is one of those movies. And part of the reason I was excited to talk about it is because there are a lot of movies I could probably talk more intelligently about. But Tokyo Story, at least to me, I've now seen it 3 or 4 times. First time I saw it, I was 15. I fell asleep, and I still loved it. I woke up probably with about 40 minutes left and was deeply moved. But yeah, I wanted to think about a movie that still felt like a mystery to me. That felt like it was doing a thing that I still couldn't quite totally explain. So one of my fears going into this tonight was that I might not have anything really intelligent to say, because so much of what I love about the movie is what works on me in ways that are hard to articulate. But that's why I wanted to talk about it, was because I thought, oh, maybe I'll learn something in the process, as opposed to trying to come here with a thing that I entirely understood. I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about something that I was still trying to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I feel the same way, watching it. I saw it when I was in film school, but don't really have much of a memory of it. So I felt like I was watching it for the first time. And it is an elusive film, I think largely because it's not trying to, it's got a light touch. It's a gentle hand in terms of communication.
So gentle, but not like, one thing that's wild to me about it is it's filled with moments of real intensity. Like, the hand is gentle, but it's not a weak hand. I think they can be so cruel to each other and so cold and do such kind of deplorable things. And it's in the context of these static frames and these beautiful images, but the people are no more evolved than us. Maybe just the filmmaking is. And so I don't know. It's a real powerful combination to me of gentleness, absolutely, in point of view, but no, it is not in any way less powerful for it. And I think there's a common misconception that quietude precludes power, at least in filmmaking. That somehow volume means emotion. And I think that's wrong. Or I at least think that that's a dangerous way to approach movies.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something that has such a sneaky hand, man. It's crazy. The way this film hangs on you, because it doesn't just jump out and jump on your back. It's just like it creeps out, it waits to fall asleep. It comes in and just like attaches itself to you. And 3 days later, you're just like, wow, I'm still carrying this thing.
Yeah.
What, do you experience it that way?
Totally. One of the coolest things for me was I watched it with my dad. and we watch very few movies, not very few movies together. We watch movies together, but I like watching movies alone. I find it easier. I don't know what this says about me, but I get very emotional during movies, and I find it easier to watch them unobserved. I don't like watching movies I haven't seen with other people because I'm afraid I'll have a really powerful reaction to it and become embarrassed. And like yeah, like I watched God, it was a Star Wars movie. Uh, God, which one was it? One of the recent Star Wars is God, it'll come back to me in a second, but it's the one where they go to get the plans of the Death Star. It's one of like the
Rogue One.
Rogue One. Yeah, I was watching Rogue One, and I was watching it with a girlfriend, and she wasn't all that into it and hadn't seen a lot of Star Wars, but was supportive that I was. And man, I just burst into tears. Could not believe how all of these people were sacrificing themselves for this small detail in A New Hope. All of this was to get the Death Star plans, which I had never thought of as a part of the story before. And all of these lives were lost in pursuit of that. And I started to sob. And she thought I was kidding. I was crying so hard, she thought I was kidding. And I became so embarrassed because I was like, this is such an outsized reaction to this movie. But it was true. I didn't do it on purpose. I was just, like chin shaking crying. I was like full on crying. And so sometimes I feel much more comfortable watching movies alone because I can do whatever I want. I can feel however I want, not have to worry about being embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And Tokyo Story. So I watched a lot of movies alone, and I watched Tokyo Story with my dad. And I wanted to. I thought it would be fun to watch it with somebody else because it changes my experience of it. I feel responsible for the movie the whole time, especially if I've seen it before. And what was cool was that it's so about generations. My dad is 65, so he's only a few years younger than the grandparents in that movie. And it was so powerful to experience it with him, and also because it's a boring movie. I think that's one of its merits, but it's a boring movie. It's very slow, and it's not obvious, and especially if you're used to like a modern cinema diet, it's not a functions in a totally different language. So the fact that he was willing to go there with me and sit through it and then enjoyed it and was very moved by it was really powerful. It was a cool thing to share. I don't really know why I go into that other than to say it was a powerful experience watching somebody else experience this thing that I loved, that I thought was that I thought other people probably wouldn't like, because I understand why. It's really slow and it's really subtle.
Your dad had a reaction to it?
Yeah, he was very moved, and we've been talking about it for 3 days. So that was the initial question: was does it hang on to you? Yeah, and I think in many ways for him more than for me, because I've seen it a lot of times. Like I think it's shaped my perspective on it. But for him, he hadn't seen it before, and so every time I go into the kitchen in the morning, and he goes, "I'm still thinking about Tokyo Story," and I'm like, "Fuck yeah, man, that's a really cool thing." And he is. We went inside after we finished it, and went to my mom and said, "You can't die. You just can't yet. We need you around for a little bit longer. It's just not time yet." And meant it. I meant it.
Well, in a way that runs headlong into the next question I have for you, which is about the influence of this film on you. but not just as a filmmaker, also as a person, which is kind of what you're getting at already. I'm just curious if you see ways that it has, informed an aspect of your personal life, either supported or subverted, or creative choices in your filmmaking.
Well, one thing that you and I spoke a lot about on Love is the wide shot close up, which uh, for everybody else, the best way I can describe that is, I believe a well composed wide can have the same power, if not more, in certain instances, as a close up, because the audience makes the close up themselves. You draw attention to a really particular part of a frame, and the audience pulls themselves forward to see it. So as a filmmaker, that's something. And time, the power of entering a shot, starting a shot, sometimes a minute before the action, and then staying there for another minute after it ends, to make the audience. It's the thing Jean Dielman does more, maybe rigorously than any other movie I think I've seen, which is it makes you aware of time, and that experience of boredom, which I do not use as a derogatory term, by the way, because I think boredom is the feeling of, oh, something should be happening, or I should be doing something that's not being done. I should be experiencing something that I am not experiencing. But I think on the other side of that boredom, there's kind of a presence, like in the momentude, a process of finding yourself exactly where you are. And I find that Tokyo Story is a movie that actually makes me look at the world differently afterwards. I sometimes wonder if the narrative of Ozu's movies is the characters, or if the narrative is all of the shots in between the characters of the world as it goes along. Like that those characters are all there to put those shots into context, as if the characters are what establishes the world. That he's showing you the characters so that you have a different awareness of the world, not the other way around. A sitcom shows you an establishing shot so you know where the characters are. But I think Ozu might show you the characters so that you know where the world is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I haven't had that thought before. It's really interesting. Yeah, how do you see this sneaking into your work, this sensitivity? Because I think your work actually, different things have different styles, but I would consider a lot of your work really observational, especially the doc stuff.
Yeah.
I think you have a way of, just like Ozu, finding a frame, letting it unfold. And do you think about Ozu in that when you're making that work, or does this film come to mind? Do you feel like it's just sort of embedded in your subconscious more so?
No, I think about Ozu literally all the time. On a life level, like it's almost like it hits my life first and then comes back to filmmaking. And it has to do with, it's so funny. I didn't actually realize, I think, how much he's meant to me. But in terms of this idea of, there's so many different ways. It's interesting. Like one that it immediately makes me think of is that our small gestures in life, like the little tells, the way somebody washes the dishes, contains everything else that they're going through if it's lived really truly. And so this idea that if you pay attention and are sensitive, there are layers deeper than you usually perceive. And I think Ozu, by paying attention to them, makes them important and then makes us look. or encourages us to. You either turn off the movie or you start to pay more attention or you fall asleep. All of which are valid responses, by the way. You know, a director once said, Sam Gold once said, it's a good thing if people fall asleep. That means we've put them in safe hands. That means they feel comfortable enough to fall asleep, and that's okay. People will fall asleep. He was doing Hamlet. It was 4.5 hours long. It was beautiful. Yeah, it was beautiful. And people did fall asleep every night. But I would see them and I would look at it and I'd realize, oh, right. He's made a space where this is possible. And then they'd wake up and they'd come right back into it. And I've done that with Ozu, where the first time I saw Tokyo Story, I fell asleep for like the middle 40 minutes. I came right out and I was like, I'm all ears. Let's go. I'm here. And I don't know that I ever left its embrace during my brief nap. Synecdoche, New York was another movie I fell asleep in during the first time I saw it. And it just had such a fucking impact on me. I had weird dreams while I was falling asleep, while I was asleep in the movie. But it didn't take away from it.
One thing I want to come back to that you mentioned that just sort of made me think about a different movie is the way in which you talk about a scene starting early and ending late.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that you kind of get told the opposite, right? It's always like, come in late, leave early. And it made me think about the first film I did in this, first interview I did in this podcast series was with Sean Dunn and Cass Greener, and talking about Dazed and Confused.
Great filmmakers. Ugh.
Yeah, those guys are slayers for sure.
Yeah.
Amazing. Talking about riding the sort of narrative of a dream. I mean, their instincts are so sharp. But we talked about Dazed and Confused. Yeah. And that's a film that I hadn't seen, since a long time ago. And it's not really a favorite film of mine, but I developed a whole new appreciation for it talking with them. I really appreciate it. It's really, really wonderful. But one thing that really struck me about the film is how that thing is pretty damn snappy. It's very it's real sharp and just in late, out early, like bang, 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 your attention. It's like, it's very, it's like candy, right? It's got a little bit of a buzzy quality to it. And Ozu is just like, he's very meditative, sleepy. I'm not sure, but I wonder about those two things because it's almost like a whole different school of thought. And I have found myself like in one camp for a project and like, this is the way to do it. And another project, it just feels like the other approach makes so much more sense. I wonder how you think about it.
I think, well, Dazed and Confused is a great movie. Like part of what I love about movies is that the language can express anything. I truly believe there is no limit to the medium. The limitation is your ability to use it, or to, there's two limitations. There's your ability to dream of how to use it, to conceive of how it can be used, and then there's the second limitation, which is your ability to make in the real world that happen. Beyond that, there are really no limitations. And I think you can get around almost every practical limitation by conceiving of a thing differently. Not to say it's easy, not to say that I want to shoot everything in my life on an iPhone from 2006. I think that was before iPhones, but iPhone from 2010. I think that was the first one that had video capabilities. But I would make the argument that you probably could, even if it's not ideal. And so I think certain films lend themselves to different vocabularies. Sometimes I just want to laugh. Sometimes I want to cry. Sometimes I want to think deeply about my life. Sometimes I just want to forget who I am. Sometimes I want to understand somebody else better. I want one of the powerful things about film, say the same about literature, is that you get to, but film in particular, you get to be inside the literal perspective of another person, or at least a group of people. Um, that to me is a profound notion. Um, so I don't think there's a right way. I mean, I hope I live a long time, and I hope I make a lot of films, and I hope, and I take really seriously I think form, style has meaning. Um, so I think you have to be really careful, or really consider, and it's not careful. Nobody's going to die if you fuck up. If you fuck up, you'll make a bad movie, and then probably the next one will be less bad, because you'll have felt the agony of having made something shitty. So that's not so dangerous. Um, yeah, you consider the approach, and you hopefully find the right one, and you find something that supports whatever it is you're trying to communicate or express. Yeah, but there's to me, no right or wrong. There's just the choice and how well you support it.
Yeah, thank you. This next question, I think we've kind of danced around it. Um, and it's kind of a multi-question question. I haven't totally figured out how to word this question. But what I want to get at is, I want to see if you have an opinion about the best way for a filmmaker to use the medium of cinema, and or if you think that there's a purpose for cinema, or how the medium might be best employed, or what intention should the medium be approached with as a maker, and how this film, Tokyo Story, might fit into that framework, if you have one.
That is, I'm going to forget the Tokyo Story angle of it first and address just the intention of it. My first thought was approach it with honesty. But then I thought, okay, let's say this is a propaganda film that is being used to seed doubt about a despot who is, let's say it's a propaganda film designed to discredit Hitler to other Germans. Maybe it's dishonest, but maybe it's moral. So I don't, it's like, what should be the intention of the written word, or what should be the intention of talking, or what should be, I don't think there is a proper intention going into a film. I think it's really worth interrogating your ideas of intention before you go in, because I think it's really important to consider. But again, I think it ties back to this idea of the medium. The medium can express anything. Like, one of the reasons I love film is because I'm constantly fucking surprised by what people can do with it. I've been spent all week, or not even all week, watching How To with John Wilson, which I don't know if you've seen, but that's great. What a lovely use of the medium, that after watching it seems so obvious, but nobody had done it before. And it's fucking profound. I mean, it's great. I had such a goddamn joy that I watched the first episode and stopped because I wanted to save them. I was like, oh, I only have 6 of these candies and I have to have them at the right time. So half of the joy is that there are as many intentions as there are people. The most basic is probably to document. I take a video for my sister's birthday as she is blowing out the candles, just to say this is a thing that happened and that someday we may want to revisit. All the way to, you name the movie. John Dielman, 2001, Tokyo Story. They're all lovely expressions of the medium. I don't think there's a bad. The intention is only as bad as. I don't think there's a wrong intention. I think there are immoral intentions, but I don't. But you can't blame that on the medium. That makes sense.
Yeah, of course. I want to ask you about a detail. Just kind of scanning through the film in your mind, is there a detail that you'd like to draw attention to? It's maybe a line of dialogue or a certain line read, a shot, a piece of blocking, something that has kind of stuck in your mind for one reason or another, or is just coming up now?
There's so many filmmakery ones, but I think those are kind of boring. I really do think of film as a means to an end. There's one that really, really got me every time I've seen it, which is the last line of the movie. The kind of grandfather character is his, spoiler alert, his wife has died, and all his children have left. And he's alone, and he's sitting in his living room where the film started. And the neighbor comes by, and they have this kind of like frank conversation about all his kids are already gone, and then how's he doing? And he says, lonely. And then she says, you will be lonely. And that line, you will be lonely, just said as a fact. It's not, hey, if you get lonely, come by, I'll make you a cup of tea. You will be lonely. Yeah, that's true. If you live on this earth, you will be lonely. Chishu Ryu will be his character. I don't know if that's how you say his name, but he will be lonely. And that, to me, it's funny because I saw that, I was probably 16 when I saw it. Just stuck with me. It relieved me of a great burden because it was just a fact. Okay, that's good to know. You're going to be lonely. You will be lonely. And in a way that made it easier because it wasn't some personal failing. It wasn't it was just true. If you live on this earth, you will be lonely. Not all the time, but sometimes. And that stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And one thing that sticks with me as you mention it is just the way in which a person said that to another person. Announced it with like not a lot of pretense, not a lot of sense of it being hurtful or it being painful or it having or it being inappropriate to vocalize. Yeah. Something freeing in that, when you hear the hard truth spoken in a way that the speaker of it holds it with reality and doesn't hold it with the pretense of fear or judgment.
Yeah, which he does throughout the movie so many different ways. This is what I mean about him as a filmmaker. Like, he's got a gentle touch, but man, he has a right hook that really puts you on your ass. He'll just say stuff. His characters will just say stuff.
Yeah.
And you just can't fight it. It's true. And you're surprised somebody will say it in this kind of really beatific setting, and these characters who talk often with a smile on their face about heartbreaking things. And they'll just say these things that, it's powerful. It's like being talked to like an adult. Except now I am an adult. And I still feel like I'm being talked to by somebody who's figured out something. That's why I love this movie. and why I wish I could make it. Because if I were able to make it, I'd be a better person than I am now. I would have an understanding I do not possess. It's not anything to do. It's a lot to do with cinema, but it's not cinematic, or it's not the cinema aspect that I don't know how to do. I can put a camera on 3 feet above the ground on a 50 millimeter lens and not move it. That's fairly easy. Um, you can make an image look pretty good, but the point of view, when all those scenes are strung together, there's no way to fake that. There's no level of imitation that gets you there other than living a life that's able to do that. I'll never be able to do that. But I'd love to be able to. I would like to meet the version of James Gallagher who could make Tokyo Story. Especially because I'd have a whole experience of Tokyo that I certainly haven't had. So I'd get the benefit of a whole nother life. But even just if we talk about its kind of themes and emotional meaning, I think that's a powerful person to aspire to be.
Yeah, as you say, what comes up for me is not just the understanding, right? To understand those things well enough to be able to make it before you see it, right? To manifest that story. But I feel like it's also, and maybe the bigger point, I wonder what you think is the willingness to do it.
The courage. I really think it takes courage, like real human courage. And also, as his filmmaking evolves, because he made a lot of movies. He worked from the early 30s to the early 60s, and died at 60, or thereabouts, but was not an especially old man when he died. Um, he refined it and refined it and refined it and refined it and refined it, and occasionally makes like this one moment in I haven't seen this movie in a while. Green Tea Over Rice, I think is what it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong. But where he like has a plot machination in a way that he doesn't usually. And he never makes that mistake again. Like he's constantly trying to simplify. And that even to me is like almost everybody I've ever admired in my life is not happy staying still, staying stagnant, is always trying to refine their approach, whatever that approach is, and whatever that approach is in service of. My grandmother Paulette, who I made this documentary about, right before she died, she said, "Learning is like the ocean. If you're learning, the tide is coming in, but if you stop learning, it starts to go out. It never gets to stay still. So if you stop learning, you're going to start to lose things. So you have to keep learning." Um, and that's not a perfect metaphor because the tide comes in and goes out and comes in and goes out. Or maybe it is a perfect metaphor because the tide goes in and comes out. But I think about that a lot. And I admire the people who have reached some level of real articulation in any medium and then continue to try and refine their methods. Even though Ozu doesn't change the stories he's telling that much. He tells the same stories over and over and over again. But he tries to refine the methodology. He tries to improve on it. And I find it, I hope to be doing that as an old man.
How would this film be different if you made it? Or another way you could think about that is what would you change if you were to make this film?
Well, I'd have to change everything. If I had to make this movie, I'd have to change everything. Because part of what's so powerful about it is if I had to make this film, like let's say, okay, James Gallagher, you have been tasked with remaking a version, however you like, of Tokyo Story. What would I try to hold on to that I could bring to the next? It's a good question. I think this is maybe more of an answer for Ozu than it is for Tokyo Story in particular. But it's a little bit like something I said to you earlier, which is the idea that those establishing shots might be in service not of the characters, that in an Ozu movie, characters are there to make the establishing shots meaningful. In most movies, establishing shots are to give you context of the characters. But in an Ozu movie, the characters are there to give you the context of the world, to allow you to see the world differently. I think that's something I could aim for. I don't know if I could do it, but if there was one thing, I can't write a movie about Tokyo. But I think I could try and get that out in a movie. I think that would be a really interesting place to start.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to bring into the genesis of a film for sure. Another way to ask that question, which is a different question altogether, is what do you wish anything was different about this film? Do you wish that you could just change something like, oh, I wish that was just over here, or take that out, or add this? And critique, I guess, or is it perfect?
I wouldn't say it's perfect at all, but I think it's a little bit like asking you to change a detail of a person you really love. Changing a thing about a person you really love changes the person you really love in a way that you don't quite know how it's going to impact. And so I think that there is a real beauty in the pockmarks of the thing. And so, as much as I'd be interested to, I have no desire to.
Even those eye lines?
Even those eye lines. Oh, absolutely, those eye lines. Well, the eye lines are a really interesting point, because Ozu has no sense of the 180 rule and fucks his eye lines all over the place. And Tokyo Story, by the way, is not the worst movie for them. He gets it way worse in other movies, so much so that you can get really lost inside of scenes where everybody's sitting and it should be really obvious. If I were to remake the movie, would I endeavor to get my eye lines right? Yes. Would I change the eye lines of Tokyo Story? No. It works, and it's doing a thing. It's not my place to. I love it. Pockmarks and all. Yeah. No, I wouldn't. It came to me as it was, and I'm very glad for it.
Yeah, there's something pretty mysterious about some of the idiosyncratic things like that. It's so shocking to me, the eyeline thing. It's the one thing I just can't quite find a way to understanding, because there's so much precision elsewhere. There's so much care and detail work that it seems like he must be, especially at this point in his career, so aware of the experience of the person's eyeline. I mean, it's such a point of, it's sort of like the thing that's shooting the emotion towards you, right? The eyes are like the emotion guns, and they're just sort of like all over the radar sometimes, and it's baffling. I couldn't. I'm like trying to map a meaning onto it. I'm like, is there?
I can do it. I'm not sure it's true, but I can do it.
Yeah, I want to hear that.
So it ties into what is the important part of the movie. Is it the world or is it the characters? And in an Ozu movie, the world often dictates the frame. Not always, but often. I'm not here to say necessarily that this works or doesn't work, but I will posit the possibility that there's something meaningful about a camera that is indifferent occasionally to who's looking at who in what direction. It goes, this is where I am. They're looking over there. It's allowed to confuse you, but this is where I am. I don't know. Again, I think to tinker, I wouldn't. I would trust it.
Mm.
The mess is a part of it. I think Tarkovsky, this is about to be a very bad paraphrase, but made the point that master artists made masterpieces not when they overcame their flaws, but when their flaws became such a fundamental part of the work that they transcended themselves essentially and turned into strengths. And so, sure, there are Ozu movies where I would argue that it gets in the way of meaning. Tokyo Story, I don't feel that way about. Yeah, I, I, I'm in defense of bad eye lines on this.
Yeah, it's mostly harmless. Well, that's not true. Yeah, it costs something for in my viewing for
Yeah,
sure. Um,
but also that's the beauty of filmmaking. Your experience and my experience are not the same.
hmm,
That's why it's such a risk, I feel like, watching a movie with somebody else, because I don't want my experience to feel any less true. Especially with one person. When you watch it in a movie theater, you regain a level of anonymity.
hmm,
But when it's just 2 or 3 people on a couch, I feel so responsible for their experience.
hmm.
Um, yeah, he's not interested in helping you in a lot of ways in the film. You know, they introduced their son in Osaka right in the middle of it, very briefly, and he comes in and gives details about his mother falling ill to one of his coworkers. And you're like, this is probably the son in Osaka, but nothing's told me this is the son in Osaka other than he's talking about his mother who was on a train who's fallen ill. But you're just thrust right into it. He's not. There's a lot of like, for somebody who moves as slowly as Ozu does, there's a lot of, come on, catch up. We're past that. We're moving. Um, it is like the tortoise that all of a sudden is at the finish line, even though the hare has been felt like they've been running the whole time. I mean, it really is. That's part of his magic trick to me. The ellipses, the things he is able to leave out, and the jumps he forces you to make yourself.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, you can really feel a filmmaker's priorities, in the way that they tell a story. And it makes me think of something that came up in a previous podcast with Luke Franick about Midnight Special, the Jeff Nichols
yeah,
movie. And really, you could say it applies to maybe all the endings of his movies. But in interviews, Jeff Nichols has said that, for his endings, he's not really concerned about plot. He actually says he thinks plot is overrated, that he thinks that his job as a director is to make sure the emotional arc gets completed. And he's more concerned about where you are emotionally at the end versus where you might be, visually or storyline wise or whatever the, the plot point is. And it makes me think about what you're saying about Ozu. Just not really, the island is not really as much of a priority as the space or the composition or maybe some other element.
yeah, and I wouldn't even view it as just technical. Like, I with Ozu in particular, I think so much of his filmmaking is determined by point of view and philosophy to some extent. That, and I don't know if he was specifically intellectual about it. I don't know that he could articulate this, and I don't know that he. I would gander, I would wager a bet that he probably had no interest in explaining any of this. But it doesn't make it any less intentional in my summation. Yeah, I think if he's not super interested in helping you in a lot of other ways, um, I think like he's chasing, I think, a truth for him. That's my impression. I'd love to talk to him. It'd be so fun to have him over for a night and to drink a little and chat.
It's wild that you said that, because that's my last question, is if you had a question for Ozu, um, what's one that comes to mind?
Huh. That's a good question, Michael. I don't have a good answer to it. Um, I honestly, my first thought was I would love to like go to his favorite bar and order drinks and just sit there until somebody decided to talk. The interesting thing is that I feel like having a conversation with him, and I feel this is true of interviews and filmmaking, like in a documentary, is the thing that needs to be said tends to come out. Um, I would be interested to know how he handled fear and what it looked like when he felt it. And if he was as confident in his approach as it looks like he was. That's what I would like to know. Because he feels so confident, so certain to me. But most people who feel that way probably aren't. You know, I remember when I was a younger filmmaker, I was talking to Richard LaGravenese, and I said, man, I just wish I was as sure as Kubrick. He could do 125 takes chasing what he wanted. And Richard laughed. And he said he didn't do 125 takes because he knew what he wanted. He did 125 takes to figure out what he wanted. And I thought, oh, right. That feels like a much more plausible explanation. And that felt true. Like that rather than Kubrick being some mastermind who had it all figured out from the beginning, the real genius of his process was that he was absolutely unwilling to settle for anything that didn't feel right. So he would keep you there for a fucking day on a close-up. That feels true. That's a different kind of ballsy. Ozu was similar in that way. He would run takes and he would just do 25, 30 takes of rehearsal just to wear everybody down. And then he'd start to shoot. Just to cut the bullshit, basically. Tucker him out. And yeah, but I'd be interested to know where fear came in for him and if it did and in what way.